your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yeah.
Would you please give us your full name?
Lance Armstrong.
You understand that although we're in the conference room of your lawyers, you are giving testimony as if you are in a court of law. Do you understand that?
Correct.
And that penalties of perjury attach to this deposition just like they would to a court of law proceeding.
Of course.
There's been allegations regarding what has been alleged to be a steroid or cortisone.
Wait a minute, a steroid or cortisone?
Cortisone, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, because they're different.
I understand, believe me.
One is actually anabolic and one is actually catabolic.
You know what they've done with the money?
I just told you I don't know.
Was it earmarked
Which
for
part
anything?
of I don't know do you not understand?
I'm just trying to make sure your testimony is clear.
How many times have I said? If it can't be any clearer than I've never taken drugs, how clear is that?
His name is Lance Armstrong, and today, if his legs feel strong, this 21-year-old Texan can become cycling's first million-dollar baby.
Regardless of the million-dollar prize, it's been a race that I wanted to win all year long, and now with that staring me in the face, it's an even bigger race.
He's going for his third consecutive victory, with only today's Core States Championship standing in the way of winning the Thrift Drug Triple Crown. Look out, Philadelphia. Lance is coming to town.
There was this million-dollar prize if Lance Armstrong could win, so all the pressure was on him. It was on the team. The thing is, he was the favorite going in. I mean, he was strong. He was beating up on everybody.
I'll be disappointed with anything but a win.
Lance had the chance to win it, but he knows the man to beat that day, it was me.
Coors Light, their man, Roberto Gaggio.
Philadelphia, it was my race. Every year I was preparing for that race.
And Frankie Andreu of Motorola, who has slowed down the brakes.
I remember that Lance made a deal with some Italians.
Stephen Schwartz, Davis Feeney, Tommy, the team have this deal with Lance.
Lance Armstrong was flying up the wall, making it look almost effortless.
The last 3 laps, it's when the race is decided. That's when Lance started talking to me. He wanted to make sure that I was in the plan. Don't want to take any risk. And he say, you know, we make a deal, and I know you the only one can count with me, but don't count with me.
And right on cue, Lance is out of the saddle, pushing himself into a higher gear.
On my heart, on my deep heart, I don't want to do it. But when you have 8 teammates, you can't go against the team.
The group can do nothing but watch Lance dance away into the lead, as they, compared to Lance, seem to be standing still.
That's all I put back and see him going, and he went.
And true to form, Lance doesn't disappoint them. Cycling's first million-dollar man, U.S. Pro Champion.
Deep inside, I feel terrible because I know I could have went.
For Lance, a joyous celebration with his mother.
The success that Lance has seen and will continue to see, of course, makes me very proud. There's not a better gift.
Lance has rolled the dice and come up a winner.
It's a big day for me, but I think it's a bigger day for cycling. Everybody won today.
As far as I know, Philly's been going around for like 30 years. I don't think that's ever been done before. So, I mean, that's a huge chunk of change.
After the race, Lance come to my room with a cake box, a metal cake box, a panettone, and he just gave it to me and say, "Merry Christmas." It was like $100,000 cash.
This was a Lance Armstrong specialty.
I really want to win a classic. I mean, if you're going to put a lot of time into it, if I'm going to be 18, 19, 20 years old and I'm going to give up an education, if I'm going to give up...
That is what you did?
Yeah. If I'm going to give up time at home, sure, it better be rewarding in terms of money.
Always in the back of Lance's mind was that great fortunes can be made in professional road racing. And for a poor kid growing up, hard scrabble in Texas. It's important. The next progression is to race in Europe, in the biggest pro races.
Como, Italy was kind of like the American base. That's where a lot of the 7-Eleven guys were living there. And at that time, Lance and I don't know how we got into the discussion, but we decided, hey, well, we'll live together for next year. And so I was like, sweet, it'll be good, it'll be fun. It was great, cooking, having risotto. I remember eating watermelon out in the balcony, and we had this bad little car that we used to get around. And we weren't teenagers, but it was like teenagers just hanging out in Europe.
Frankie was Lance's closest friend. And because I was dating Frankie, I became friends with Lance as well. And he was fun. He was fun to hang out with. And Lance and I had a unique relationship because so many people from early on would just kowtow to him. But with Lance, he would try to rib me and try to just get me going. And so we would butt heads and we would argue. But we kind of, I think, enjoyed getting under each other's skin.
Hello again and welcome back to the Tour de France. Well, it's stage 8 this morning and the sun is still shining. The race has now been...
The Tour de France, really hard.
Lance Armstrong now taking his real...
Racing bikes in Europe is bad for you. It's not healthy. You sacrifice a lot to be successful.
At the Tour de France, I was rooming with Lance, and I was like, Lance, this is your day. This is the one you can win. And he's like, really? You think so? I'm like, yeah.
The sprinter Armstrong is 5th down the line. Watch out. Armstrong has the advantage.
It's got like a little 6K climb at the end. I mean, it's power, downhill sprint. It's like, it's perfect. And on that day, the whole team committed, led him out to the bottom of that climb, and pretty much like, all right, go.
Armstrong boxed in by Dominique Arnoux, who won the first stage of the Tour a year ago. They pushed Armstrong very, very wide indeed as Pensek goes. And Pensek really isn't a sprinter. This would be a surprise. Ronan Pensek leading out. Now Armstrong goes on the left of the picture. Lance Armstrong in his first Tour de France. They all said he was too young, but he gets it up the line. Lance Armstrong.
We met at the Motorola Hotel. He was only 21 years of age. He was riding the Tour for the first time. And in that pathetic way of sports writers, we like to be able to say at some future point, oh, I interviewed Lance when he was just a kid in his first Tour, and it was going to be like a badge of honor.
That was a lot of fun. That was really, I think, just the way it went down with the last climb, and guys were attacking, and I was so motivated.
When I asked him about what he felt like coming towards the end of a race, he said, oh, when I get in a situation with a little group of 6 or 8 riders and I know I've got a real chance of winning, he said, I start to shriek and my body shakes. And I think about my mom. She didn't raise a quitter. I had this sense of a guy who just wouldn't be beaten, who, through the force of his will and his personality, became almost somebody different.
There's Decker on the floor again, and Lance Armstrong has sprinted the gap close. Lance Armstrong has joined now Franz Masson. Now he's looking back and seeing nobody as he becomes champion of the world. Lance Armstrong, 21 years of age, is America's second only world ever road race champion. Beating the greatest man of the moment in world cycling, Miguel Indurain. He raised a smile there, but I think Miguel very disappointed. And could it be that we're watching the man who will replace the great Greg LeMond in the years ahead? Lance Armstrong now. Indurain goes now up to him. We'll hopefully re-establish him as the best rider.
Through 1993, the races just increased. The speeds were so dramatic. It was night and day.
Armstrong is about to get caught by Indurain. You can see Indurain will just fly by him, and it's going to be very strange for Lance Armstrong.
One of the riders was told what was going on in the Spanish team. The rider just said, guys have no chance. We're doing EPO growth hormone, testosterone. You'll never make it.
He comes up to the line. 1 hour 15:58, 2 minutes precisely.
The way that guy came by, and that was probably part of the reason that I was so wasted in the end, because I tried to match his speed, and he goes along the flats 55, 56, 57 Ks an hour. I was 53.11, getting dropped.
We're talking about the speed of the pelotons, talking about this new drug EPO, and talking about Dr. Ferrari.
Lance would have known Ferrari by reputation. Now he wanted to meet the man and start working with him.
Ferrari had a reputation of being the best in the business. Like, if you wanted to win races, you're going to win the Tour, you go see this guy and he's going to set you up. As good as that reputation was, everybody knew that if you went to see Ferrari, you were going to get doped. So Lance kept it a secret from everyone for a long time.
Lance had the intelligence to see that Ferrari was special in terms of his understanding of physiology and of the drugs and how they interacted. With his charisma and his natural intelligence, Lance was able to endear himself to Ferrari, become the Adam of what would be Ferrari's creation. You keep doing your job as Frankenstein and I'll be the best monster you've ever created. And Ferrari loved him for that. You know, the pupil from heaven.
The train just started rolling full blast, just like it was just reefing across the landscape.
It is, he's gone. Armstrong has gone. The sort of thing he did in the World Championship in Oslo.
Is this man on the start of his greatest ever season?
They're travelling at nearly 40 miles an hour. Armstrong showing enormous determination. When I spoke to him before the Pyrenees, he looked...
You couldn't develop a product more perfect for the ravages of endurance athletics than EPO.
But Armstrong has done it today. Fabio Capitelli, he's pointing up there to where the man is...
EPO was done in secret. You never knew what anybody else was doing. Even for the top guys, they never knew what the other guy was doing. So everybody thought they had to do more in order to be able to win or to keep up. Well, I was tired of getting beat up on, tired of getting dropped and watching fat sprinters get over Category 1 climbs and win, and getting thrown out the back of the group. I'm not gonna, you know, sleepless nights, figuring out, and then...
You did a great job. Great job. That's our Frankie. Yeah. That's Frankie's in front. That's great. Congratulations.
Thanks a lot.
Excited.
You've been enjoying the Tour de France? No comment.
Sure enough, eventually, I cracked. Yeah, I drove to Switzerland and pretty much just walk into a pharmacy. It's just like, could have bought chewing gum. It was that easy.
But then the punch-up started. Lance Armstrong, number 61 for the Motorola team.
When you're racing, you think you're invincible. You think you can do anything. Nothing's going to stop you. Nothing's going to harm you. And then all of a sudden...
From the beginning of the tour, I knew that I was a step off. And a lot of times when your body is down like that, then a virus or an illness will move in and take over.
That evening, the phone rings, and I hear Lance's neighbor on the other end, and he said, "Linda, I don't know any easy way to tell you this, but Lance has been diagnosed with cancer." It literally crushed every single piece of me on the inside.
On Wednesday, October 2nd, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. Prior to seeing my doctor last week, I had been experiencing swelling and pain in one of my testicles, and I coughed up some blood. On Thursday, October the 3rd, I underwent surgery at St. David's Hospital here in Austin to have the malignant testicle removed. A CAT scan was also performed the same day. The CAT scan revealed that my condition has spread into my abdomen.
At the time, I think most people would have suggested, with the brain metastases and such, that at best you'd cure maybe 1 out of 3 of those people.
It was awful, and I thought, how in the hell does a guy who's in such good shape, so young, get cancer?
The first impression I got, which is the impression I get from a lot of people, is that he was scared. He was certainly looking at very primal aspects, you know, saving his life or not, and a lot of secondary consequences, his career, family, future kids, all that.
We wanted to go see Lance, and the time to see him was after his brain surgery, and so Frankie and I made the 6-hour drive to Indiana.
And that was the first time I'd seen him since the announcement. And I remember seeing the big horseshoe scar on the top of his head. We went in to the room, and there was a football game. Dallas Cowboys football game was playing. So he was in there. His girlfriend at the time, Lisa Shields, was there. And Stephanie McIlvain, the rep from Oakley, was there. Chris Carmichael, his coach, was there with Paige, I think.
And the doctors came in. And when the doctors came in,
they said, oh, you know, we need to ask you some questions. I said, oh, we should leave, let him have his privacy. And I said, no, don't worry about it. Lance said, you guys can stay, no problem. And I said, okay, we'll stay.
they asked a few banal questions, and then one of them was, have you ever used any performance-enhancing drugs? And Lance, just nonchalantly holding onto his IV, staring down, rattled off, yeah, EPO, testosterone, growth hormone, cortisone, and steroids.
And at that point, my jaw was like, holy shit, because Betsy's sitting right next to me. I don't know what the hell she's thinking, and I was like, we gotta go. And we stood up and walked out of the room right away.
I was furious because I said to him, that's how Lance got his cancer, and if you're doing that, I'm not marrying you. We were just engaged 6 weeks earlier.
She was upset that he was taking that stuff. She was crazy, like if I was taking that stuff. And if you're taking all that stuff, it obviously is gonna affect your health.
Because I thought, oh my gosh, is this going on? Is everybody doing this? And Frankie swore to me, no.
Had to do with trust and if she's gonna marry me. So, it was, I think she even right there on the spot threatened, like, I'm not marrying you if you're doing all that stuff, so.
I was just ready to call the whole thing off.
Before cancer, Lance had signed up for the French team, Cofidis. It wasn't known if he would live or race bikes again. All of those things were not known.
I still have a ways to go on the bike.
Does it sound like some kind of miracle to you?
No, it's not a miracle. Everything was the therapy was normal therapy. I had to do just as much as everybody else, so.
He made the decision to go because they were astonished to see him there. And then he decided he would carry on to Italy and see Michele Ferrari for what would have been really just like a friend-to-friend visit. And that is extraordinary because it indicated that in a relatively short time, he and Michele Ferrari had become very close. And it was also a visit to say, if I come back and I make a full recovery, I'm going to achieve everything I ever wanted to achieve, whatever it takes. And I want you working with me.
The American Mafia.
It took him a long time to find a team and a structure that would make it worthwhile.
When I tried to come back, there was no interest. None.
And then finally signed the deal with the U.S. Postal Team.
I think that if I were to come back and to win and to be successful, I would consider that a complete recovery as an athlete.
As much as Lance wanted to win, Tom Weissel wanted to win, and he's the creator of the US Postal Team. People talk about Lance being this kind of ruthless alpha male leader. Tom Weissel was one of those. A ruthless guy. Lance's first contract was for minimal wages. Weissel said, go out there, win races, prove you're back competitive, and I'll give you a huge bonus.
And he went after those bonuses like tooth and nail.
Lance, you have 40 seconds on Mazzolini and 1 minute and 10 seconds. 1 minute and 10 seconds.
Brunel, Director Sportif.
Hi, camera.
On certain teams, you have riders that are acquaintances.
He was just smiling a minute ago.
They're co-workers. That 99 Tour team, we were friends and good friends. We were close. It was a close-knit group of riders. Hincapie, Livingston, Van de Velde, Lance, and we would do anything for each other.
I hate the French.
Lance.
Screw the French.
Frankie was on that team. Tyler Hamilton was on that team.
When I got selected to do the team, I told my parents, I told them to come over because this is probably the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see me in the Tour de France.
Lance, Kristen, Frankie, and I were driving from Milano to San Remo. And Lance had to make a stop to see Ferrari, which was outside of Milano in the parking lot of a hotel gas station in Ferrari's camper van. And I said, why are you meeting him here? Isn't that odd? You're meeting Ferrari, your doctor here? He said, so the fucking journalists don't find out. And I said, well, what's wrong if the journalists find out? And he just looked at me and he glared. Kristen and I had to waste about an hour until Lance was done doing his test with Ferrari. When he was finished, Lance was pretty excited and he said, my numbers are great. And then he got in the car, he looked through his rearview mirror, he looked at me and he said, Frankie could get results too, but he's too cheap.
He told me a bunch of times that I needed to step up and I should go see Ferrari. You know, there's no way. I just felt like if I was even linked as going to see Ferrari, that automatically meant I was a doper.
The danger about EPO there in France was, there was a big bust the year before. Riders and staff went to jail.
Le dopage avait cours dans l'équipe Festina.
French police raided the hotel rooms of several leading riders and found stashes of performance-enhancing drugs.
Another leading rider was missing from the lineup in police custody after drugs were found.
It was the year after the Festina affair where a lot of drugs were caught within a team. The team couldn't risk taking it to the race. We'd lose a sponsor right away. So to get EPO for the Tour de France, we came up with a plan.
Well, after last year's sensational Tour de France, who knows what we can expect this time around. The departure of the man everybody is talking about, Richard Virenque. Did you hear that cheer, Paul?
The plan had Moto Man involved. Moto Man was a French, he used to be a gardener / handyman for Lance Armstrong. He loved to ride motorcycles.
Back to Abraham Olano. I think probably the #1 favorite now.
He would follow the race, always stay within probably a half-hour drive from our hotel.
The best finisher of a year ago, Bobby Jewett.
He's based everything on this month for the Tour de France. He wants to be the American winner. But the man doing great times out on the course, Phil, is Lance Armstrong.
He hasn't been here for a couple of years because of his illness, but he's back now.
Moto Man would basically just wait for a phone call. The EPO would arrive, in the evening.
Just about done. 8:18, Chris Boardman. 8 minutes and 12 seconds for Abraham Olano. 8:09, Zuller has rewritten the finishing order for now. And Armstrong coming up now. Now, can he get off to a great start in the Tour de France? He is aiming at 8 minutes and 9 seconds. He's certainly ahead of Chris Boardman at this point. My goodness me! 8:02.51. Lance Armstrong with that performance, Paul, I think may have done enough.
The team doctor, Garcia Del Moro, he knew about it. Johan Bernal knew about it. You're right there in the heart of the Tour de France, Thousands and thousands of people around the team camper.
All the way from Indianapolis. No time, sorry.
I remember just trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible. We quickly just stuck it in, got rid of it, and then it was quickly hidden away, typically in like a Coke can. It was nerve-wracking. But yet, at the time, it was kind of exciting, too, because you were being such a deviant.
Sestriere, the first big mountain day.
Destination Sestriere, 213 kilometers the distance.
We had a job to set up Lance to keep him as fresh as possible till that final climb.
The US Postal, where the pacemaking up the climb was done by Frankie Andreu.
We had to set the tempo to be able to keep things together, and then riding on the front like a drag race, as hard as we could, to the bottom of the climb, turn, and then start riding as hard as I could, like a field sprint.
When I was watching the tour on TV, I saw Frankie climbing, leading the pack up a mountain in Sestriere. He doesn't specialize in sprinting. He doesn't specialize in mountain climbing. He just specializes being the worker bee. So when Frankie was actually pulling on Sestriere, it just didn't make sense. And so I called a friend of mine in Paris. And I said, are you seeing what I'm saying? And she said, yeah, isn't it great? Frankie's doing wonderful. He's doing so well. And I said, wonderful my ass. He's not a climber. He should not be pulling.
Was an attack there by Armstrong.
Attaque d'Armstrong, ça c'est fort.
Look at the acceleration of this as he chases down those motorbikes. 5.5 hours he's been pedaling today, marking everything, never looking distressed, and now he's going to try and tear this race apart.
That was an unbelievable attack. He took a lot of risk to go up through the inside there. There was hardly any room at all. Armstrong is so comfortable. He jumped across that gap. That gap was up to 30 seconds.
We're watching the Sestriere stage, and it was shocking. It was like, oh my God, these dropping riders, dropping climbers.
This man has managed to come back from the face of death, and now he's...
One of the mechanics was right next to me, and he said, "Il est sur la joue."
And Armstrong is ripping the legs off this climber right now.
"Il est sur la joue." Like, he's on the juice. And I'm like, what? He said he's on the juice.
He is just going faster and faster and faster, and he is going to win this.
I said, how do you know? He said, look at his eyes, his breathing. There's no suffering. It's almost like whatever they're doing, they got so much oxygen, it's like they're not feeling the pain. He's talking on his radio, his phone, and it was surreal.
Facile, Lance Armstrong. Trop facile aujourd'hui, là, il assomme l'étape.
And the rain starts again as Lance Armstrong conquers Sestriere. Now he heads up towards the line. Now he's ridden fast and dropped his rivals, mano a mano. This will be some victory salute. It'll be a while before we know if it is as the winner of the Tour de France, but there are few people in this race now will doubt that. Lance Armstrong comes across the line, winner today of the mountain stage of the Tour de France. He is really ripping the race apart.
And so that night, after the race, I had called Frankie, and I said, what in the hell was that? And he said, what was what? What are you doing? What are you taking? I don't believe you. This is bullshit.
There were a lot of secrets, a lot of, it was almost like I was in this just bizarre movie, some sort of wild western movie.
Lance Armstrong, le maillot jaune, soupçonné de dopage.
But something didn't go right.
Lance Armstrong n'a pas avoué qu'il avait pris des produits, des corticoïdes.
It was the UCI really who alerted us.
En matière de dopage, Lance Armstrong n'a rien à cacher.
After winning the prologue, you're tested.
Yeah, but then everybody saw you speaking to the Italian, so is it just an English language ban?
So when Lance was tested for that, when the results came back, he had high levels of corticosteroids in his system.
Cortisone definitely worked. You could push through to a whole nother level on it. So over the years, yeah, I myself took cortisone many times, not for injuries, but for performance enhancement.
Everyone was respecting that. You're going to speak at the...
Actually, we were looking for you in there.
You were? Okay.
Okay.
Lance had asked us to pick up something from the Spanish doctor in Spain.
What these people need to remember is that I was the world champion in 1993 when nobody had heard of drugs.
So I went down to Spain, picked up the product. That was Cloak and Dagger.
Nobody had heard of EPO.
Johan, he just kind of passed it as he was walking by. He just passed it into my hand and said, lovely day, just to make sure I had it.
I've proven my class. I've showed my class from day one.
Then we were getting back up to the border to go into France. There's never a queue at this border.
There's no secrets here.
There was a queue. I'd seen what happened after the Festina affair. And thought, oh God, I could be one of these that got picked up last year in the Tour, and that I must have aged about 10 years.
We have the oldest secret in the book. Hard work.
So, but luckily enough, we didn't get stopped. Came back to France and gave Lance a little bottle in the car park at McDonald's and Fraser's. We needed to come up with a proper plan that we're all on the same page. So while I'm giving Lance his massage, the others from the team came in. The problem that had to be sorted was that Lance didn't have a prescription for corticosteroids. So the idea was then that the doctor would write a prescription for that, but backdate it to pre the prologue and just pretend it was a cream that Lance was taking for saddle sores.
Well, we now know that Tom Weissel and Mark Gorski, the team manager, were in that room, and I have no doubt that they were part of that cover-up.
Oh, there's Emma.
And then as we kind of come to the end of the whole conversation about steroids, Lance just goes, oh well, now you know enough to bring me down. The next day was the press conference and everything could just blow up in everybody's face.
Back into sport and risk my life with performance-enhancing drugs is crazy. When I tried to come back to the sport, nobody gave me a chance. Nobody gave me a chance. So he must be doing something. So it's the same mentality. It's the same mentality. It's consistent through and through.
Tonight, he has some very high-level help because the UCI, the World Governing Body of Cycling, have just released this press communique. They confirm basically that the rider used an ointment and they give the brand name, and that he also offered them a medical prescription before his test.
As he comes up to the line, it's 16 seconds, 15, 14. It is getting desperately close here. Zuller versus Armstrong, and Zuller loses. Armstrong is the winner. He has achieved yet another page in this fairy story that just goes on.
I'm so proud of my son, always have been, and the fact that we overcame cancer, and we're here today in the yellow jersey.
And when you see him tomorrow in the yellow jersey on the Champs-Élysées?
A picture without words.
They are celebrating a hero.
The most fantastic feeling. We're just so proud of him and his whole team. It's absolutely incredible, and we're so excited to celebrate tonight, all of us.
We were talking about how our lives were going to change, and so I asked the question, so what do you think about EPO, Kristen? Oh, it's a necessary evil. And I thought, oh my God, she doesn't care. She just doesn't care.
Is that yours? Hey, maillot jaune. Smile, huh? Say cheese.
Howdy. Congratulations, friend. On behalf of all of us in Texas and America, we're so proud of you.
You and Lance is on the wheel. Lance is on the wheel.
Oh, there's Tyler. Take it easy on camera. Luis. How are you? Are you tired today? Good. You feel well, eh? Carmichael and Stapleton. Unbelievable. They're so serious. The man, the myth, Johan Brunel. Say hello to my family.
Hi, family.
In Texas, all eyes were on American Tour de France winner Lance Armstrong. The parade was held yesterday in his honor in Austin, Armstrong's adopted hometown. Many people wore yellow. That's the color of the winner's jersey in the Tour de France.
Proclaimed July 29 in the city of New York as Lance Armstrong Day.
Bicycling's biggest prize, the Tour de France. The first American winner to lead an American team, and in record time at that.
Nobody believed in us. Nobody believed that if Lance Armstrong took the yellow jersey with the help of his team on stage 8, how could they keep it to stage 22? They thought the team would crack. But that team of 7 out of 9 guys being American, and American team, American sponsor, they were the strongest team in the race. And everybody in Paris knew that. And I can assure you that next year's Tour de France, there will be no doubters.
Welcome to Futuroscope on the outskirts of Poitiers and to the 87th running of the Tour de France.
All of a sudden, they're talking about this EPO test coming out.
Le mouvement cycliste est d'accord de faire déjà pendant ce Tour de France des tests.
We didn't know exactly when it was coming out, but no longer could you feel 100% safe. You take a shot of EPO, you get tested the next day or the day after that, and we weren't 100% sure we were going to test negative. So that's when we did a blood transfusion.
Who was organizing all of that?
Lance and Johan Brunel and the Dr. Delamoral. They told me a couple days before we made a trip down to Spain. my first time doing it. And it seemed kind of sort of caveman-like, you know, taking out your own blood and not seeing it for 3 or 4 weeks.
Weather conditions out here are atrocious. It's probably around about 6 or 7 degrees Celsius.
The night before our first rest day, we were in this small hotel in just south of Mount Ventoux, which is a famous climb in France. 20 minutes before it actually happened, they told me we're doing the transfusion. Reinfuse the blood tonight. Arrived in my room and it was pretty wild. The staff had sort of prepared everything, the doctors. And there was a blood bag taped up on the wall, you know, a red tube coming down, a tube filled with blood coming down. And basically, you know, injected me here. I have pretty small veins, so the one place that always worked was right there. And you can see the scars today. It's a big needle. It's a serious needle. You don't mess around with those things. Halfway through it, I'm like almost shivering because, you know, these bags have been, you know, in a refrigerator. So it'd be almost like taking icy cold water, maybe a gallon of it, and pouring it down your throat.
I never did, you know, blood transfusions, growth hormone, whatever. I wasn't willing to get onto a full doping program. Betty was upset, so that was definitely on my mind, and a little bit of being scared of getting caught.
Here is the devil, and he's probably wishing some luck to the U.S. Postal Riders today. And
I think we're all pretty, you know, nervous, but we're almost giddy about it, you know. We're in the heart of France doing this completely illegal procedure.
Postal, where the pacemaking by Frankie Andreu, but he paid the price. He's now being dropped by the peloton.
I remember the third week I was dead. I mean, barely able to get through it, and just, you know, it's not an option to quit. That's the only reason I got through it. But I was getting dropped and in the back, and I was suffering a lot.
I think he'll just about get in, but he's aiming at the time of 1:5:27. We are watching probably the second fastest time trial in the history of the Tour de France.
I had done a lot to help Lance Armstrong. I'd done a lot to help the team, and I just wanted to race one more year, but they had different thoughts.
Armstrong rocks and rolls his way home here now. His time is 1:5:01. He wins the time trial.
Fantastic. I will definitely come back. I will definitely be back next year. I don't know how many more years, but definitely be back next year.
He finished 111th, but on Lance's team, it doesn't pay to finish 111th when you're at the Tour.
I would say, Johan, thanks for giving us the vision, but we already had the vision, so.
Here we are at this Tour de France party with hundreds of people, and everybody is celebrating the cancer survivors' incredible win at the most grueling sporting event in the world. What wasn't there to celebrate? It was a fraud. It was a fraud. Stephanie McIlvaine wasn't invited to the Tour de France party, which we found very peculiar, given that she was Lance's personal liaison. So she went as our guest. And we clicked, and a friendship was born. Stephanie had been there with us, visiting Lance in Indiana, and the hospital incident came up. And Stephanie and I were marveling at how Lance was snowballing the American media, because they were just buying into this fairy tale.
It seemed like it worked. Now looking back, oh my God, what was I doing? But you're so deep into it, you know, you don't even have time to take a half step back and look at the big picture.
I think if we all kind of sat back and looked at the great franchises that have been built.
I'm glad we didn't get caught. We all would have been.
It became very divided. You're on Lance's side or you're on my side. And ultimately, you know, he had control of who was hired, fired, and whichever.
Frankie was a good guy. To have your career end because you wouldn't get on Lance's doping program is just, it's not right.
Please welcome 1999's SB Comeback Athlete of the Year.
We're all in this together. It's going to touch all our lives, and we will win this fight one day.
Lance called me one day and said, we're putting together this foundation, Lance Armstrong Foundation. We're going to focus on testicular cancer.
Thank you all.
Tour de France, baby. Lance Armstrong, Maillot Jean Posse.
Thank you, Lance! Thank you! I love you!
People believed in Lance. They believed in his story. They believed in his hope.
We're all going to leave, I think, with a different perspective on this illness and a different perspective on this movement called survivorship.
I tip my hat to Lance Armstrong and to the whole U.S. Postal team.
The success of the foundation began to grow and succeed literally in tandem with Lance's success, tour after tour after tour.
$15,000. Can we go 20? Sold. $30,000.
They approached me about exploring the possibility of coming down and running the foundation.
Sold. $56,000.
My motivation, my primary motivation in taking that position was the fact that I had a very personal experience. I had been diagnosed with cancer.
We believe in life, your life.
Greg LeMond was my friend, and I called him.
And I begged him. I said, Steve, you won't make it. I said, you are way too ethical. I'm just telling you, don't do it.
But I needed to talk to Lance. We met at a bar, and I said, is there anything that might happen that would negatively impact the work of the foundation and me professionally? And he put his beer down and looked me in the eye and said, Steve, you have nothing to worry about. We're gonna have a good ride on this. This is gonna be great.
There is Armstrong. Not looking good. He's all over his machine right now. He doesn't look good, Phil. He should not be riding so far down the group. He's obviously having a very hard day.
He looks as though he's blowing.
This is where you have to race along, and Armstrong's gone.
A big move by Lance this, and there's no reply coming at all from Jan Ulrich. Ulrich has got no answer to this acceleration.
He has fooled everybody in the Tour de France.
I never expected Armstrong to do this. He has ripped the field apart, and he is climbing now to the... As he was riding to win the Tour de France, now are we seeing the foundations of the man who will win the Tour for the third time in Paris? Yes, that's the one I wanted, and I've got it.
I had been convinced for some time that Armstrong worked with Michele Ferrari. I got the Italian police to help me. They got me evidence that Lance, in the space of 2 years, spent 13 days in the town of Ferrara. And the only reason, if you were Lance Armstrong, for being in Ferrara was to see this doping doctor.
L'Américain serein en conférence de presse, comme sur la route, il n'a éludé aucune question, aucun piège, même sur le dopage.
He had to do a press conference on the rest day in Pau.
I think this is a clean tour.
And in that press conference, 16 questions go, no questions about doping, and then bang, first question is asked. And the doping questions then come like in an avalanche. And as soon as the question turned to doping, Lance did something quite strange.
I believe he's an honest man, I believe he's a fair man, and I believe he's an innocent man.
He started fixing his gaze on me. And even though it was some journalist over here who asked the question, Lance would refer to me in his answer.
I've never denied the relationship, even to you. People are not stupid. They say, has Lance Armstrong ever tested positive? No. Has Lance Armstrong been tested? A lot.
But I found that just wholly unconvincing.
Lance Armstrong a été accueilli par des applaudissements.
2 weeks later, David Walsh called up, and I'm like, God, I don't know what to say. So I chose my words as well as I could, and I just said, I'm disappointed he's seen Ferrari.
And then David posed the question, now, if he's clean, would you consider this the greatest comeback in the history of sport? And I said, absolutely.
And he said, but what if he isn't? I said, then it'd be the greatest fraud.
After that comment came out, our whole lives changed in an hour after that was published.
We went out to dinner, and Lance, he said, fucking the man. His comments about Ferrari, and how he's disappointed that I'm working with Ferrari.
Lance flipped, you know, and at that dinner, it was Vince session. You know, who's Greg think he is? I'm gonna destroy him, you know, all this kind of stuff.
And I said, yeah, but I thought Ferrari's a bad guy. And he just looked at me and he glared. And he said, I'm gonna fuck him over.
Lance returned to the U.S. He was scheduled to throw the opening game baseball at Yankee Stadium, and he was sitting in his hotel room at the Four Seasons. He calls Greg LeMond.
We were at Bag Plane, Minneapolis Airport. I had pulled up outside, and the phone rang, and Greg says, it's Lance.
And he said, oh, come on, your win in 89 was a miracle, just like mine in 99. And I said, whoa, that's where you're wrong, buddy, because mine wasn't a miracle. I worked my ass off. I barely won by 8 seconds. No miracle there.
8 seconds. He said to Greg, you're telling me you never did EPO?
Absolutely not. Oh, come on, everybody takes EPO. And he mentioned drugs that I never heard of. Hemassist, Hemopure, PFCs. He listed probably 10 drugs I've never heard of. Is that what you think I'm on? I'm like, whoa.
You know, he was vicious.
He said, well, if you want to throw stones, I'll throw stones. And he said, I'll get 10 people to say you took EPO. Holy shit.
And Greg just said, I'm sorry, but if anybody comes out saying I used EPO, I'm gonna know it came from you. And you paid him.
Because I know that Steve was working at Lance Armstrong Foundation. I called him just to say, you know, this is what happened to me.
This is Greg LeMond calling.
He was clearly shaken, and he proceeds over the course of 45 minutes to an hour telling me exactly what had just transpired, including the threat. The next day, I get a call from Lance, and he proceeds to tell of his conversation with Greg. He was out of control. He was clearly drunk.
We've gotten reports back that, oh yeah, Greg had a drug and alcohol problem. I actually had a reporter call and ask me one day if Greg had a heroin problem.
What was interesting is Lance's version was completely different than Greg's version. And it was certainly at that moment in time, I thought, I had been made a fool of. I packed my car and I drove out of Texas, and the next day I resigned.
Absolutely, and I had to learn a lot about the illness, and I had to learn a lot about my options.
Did you ever consider the option of giving up?
Oh, no.
See, that's great. That's great. Because it's not an option, is it? It's just not an option.
Tyler Hamilton left the team because Tyler was incredibly ambitious and he was resentful of Lance's profile. He was an absolutely driven guy, a bit like Lance, had to win. And Tyler thought the only way that I can win the tour is to be in another team. And when I go and leave this team, I then am going to get a doping program just as good, if not better, than Lance's.
It became more stresses, you know, having to work with my own special doctor there in Spain, having to organize those trips. It wasn't the team handling it. The easy part about the U.S. Postal Service cycling team, for me, in terms of doping, was it was all kind of taken care of, like one-stop shopping.
O'Grady has moved too far back, and there's been a mass pile-up there. I think it was Towler that went down as the peloton completely crashes on the line.
When Tyler Hamilton left the team, Lance needed a young American guy, preferably, to take Tyler's place. Floyd was the obvious example. He was talented, he was gritty, he was tough, and he's saying to Johan, I'll do whatever it takes.
We have to make sure that we're not in a situation like Paris-Nice, for example. Floyd will remember that very well. Floyd?
Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, I won't forget that anytime soon.
You're 27 seconds faster than Solear. You're 40 seconds faster than Cynical. Everyone, come on. Keep the team together. We're going to win it.
There was a train here, and it was dripping with gravy.
Here they are, the blue train.
And these guys were desperate to mop up as much as they could for themselves because the financial rewards were huge.
Okay.
This is the best team in the world right now.
I saw what I deemed a huge fraud being played out on a world stage, and there was no place to turn.
Journalists had approached me, and some of them had got the questions they'd emailed me across and stuff were very close to what was going on.
All the peloton are on Armstrong's side. The sponsors are on Armstrong's side. The UCI were on Armstrong's side. Everybody had a stake in Lance being a success. And of course, anybody who accused him was deemed an enemy of the sport.
London sports writer David Walsh accuses Armstrong of doping in the book LA Confidential. The book, published only in France, quotes Armstrong's former massage therapist, who claims she covered up injection marks with makeup.
I remember I was sweeping my sitting room floor. Sky Sports is on. In the corner of my eye, I can see the ticker tape underneath the gun. And it says, former Armstrong masseuse Emma O'Reilly spills the beans, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, I have to say my first thought was, I am going to get David Walsh and wring his neck.
I'll say one thing about the book, and especially since our esteemed author is here. In my view, I think extraordinary accusations must be followed up with extraordinary proof. And they have not come up with extraordinary proof.
Why couldn't it just be proof that allegations must be followed up by proof? And what Lance was saying is that when you're an icon who sits as high in the firmament as I do, you're going to have extraordinary proof to bring me down. And it was true. What he was saying was right. Different rules apply to the gods, and I am a god.
Mr. Armstrong's legal team was very concerned about the book and wanted to discredit David Walsh. They knew one of the sources was likely Betsy Andrew, and they wanted Betsy Andrew and Frankie Andrew to distance themselves from the book and say Mr. Walsh had it wrong.
Lance told me that his two agents, Bill Stapleton and Bart Naggs, wanted to talk with me. So I was like, okay. I knew what was coming. I knew what it was going to be about.
He asked me, he said, should I tape the conversation? I said, hell yeah, because he'll say it never happened.
We met in the parking lot of the Tour de France start after everybody had, all the riders had left, and so I put a tape recorder in my pocket and I tape recorded everything.
So is Betsy willing to issue a statement that, or go on record that she has no comment with Walsh? She did not tell David Walsh about the hospital. I know that for sure. And I never told.
Because I didn't trust these guys, Still don't trust them. We talked about how bad it would be for the sport if Lance gets in trouble and all this comes out.
Yeah, because the other option is full-out war in French court, and it could blow the whole sport.
They wanted her to sign an affidavit saying she would never go against Lance Armstrong for the rest of her life, something crazy.
You want her to come out with a statement saying, I will never testify against Lance? Well, I mean, she could make a supportive statement about Lance. You know her and Lance don't get along. Yeah. So she's not going to come out with a statement saying, I like Lance. Lance is a good guy. So maybe we can craft something that she's comfortable with.
You can imagine when I brought that up to Betsy. So, Betsy, they want you to sign something saying you never sue or go against Lance Armstrong, and it was just a bunch of cuss words.
Yeah, because I saw what they were doing. It was ridiculous. Okay, first of all, Frankie loses his job because he won't get on a doping program, and now they are trying to get me to sign something to support Lance, whom I believe is cheating. It's not going to happen.
There's no argument who the champion is of the Tour de France.
And when I refused...
It's been 4 times now. How do you differentiate?
It just was not good for Frankie's career.
Thank you, Lance.
The yellow jersey was owned by only one man, as it has been for the last 8 days.
Lance Armstrong benefited from SCA and Bob Hammond paying an enormous amount of prize money for him winning races that Lance Armstrong swore he won cleanly.
As he races to the line to the victory.
The total amount to Lance, if he won all of the Tour de France races, came close to almost $10 million.
Lance, well, I'm back for more next year. Probably.
When somebody consistently goes against the odds, the evidence is that perhaps the odds aren't what you think they are, and something else is present. And quite often that's cheating.
He is down the ramp for the last time in his career.
I've decided that the Tour de France will be my last race as a professional cyclist.
It is the picture we will never see again. A rider in yellow we've come to know since 1999. You won't believe what the crowd are doing here. They are leaping in every direction as Lance Armstrong brings it to an end as a winner. History in the making. Now retires 7 times a winner of the Tour de France.
Lance Armstrong!
The last thing I'll say for the people that don't believe in cycling, the cynics and the skeptics, I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry you can't dream big, and I'm sorry you don't believe in miracles. But this is one hell of a race. This is a great sporting event, and you should believe. And vive le Tour forever. Thank you.
Good morning. This begins videotape number 1. The arbitration matter of Lance Armstrong et al. Versus SCA Promotions Incorporated et al.
Bob Hammond kind of basically felt that he'd been duped. He'd already paid Lance, I think, $4.5 million at that time. He balked at paying the last $5 million bonus.
Mr. Armstrong, my name is Jeff Tillotson. I represent...
It became a lawsuit, and over the course of about a year and a half, we took depositions, which is sworn testimony. We plied through records.
The day before the SCA deposition, I received a phone call from him. Lance said, just call him, see how you doing. I hadn't talked to the guy in like 4 years, and saying, I heard this is, Kathy Lamont said this, that Betsy said this. He was prying for information and questions and trying to say, hey, I'm here. I'm right at your door. And he showed up at the doorstep.
So when I showed up, I saw Lance walking in the hallway. And I thought, oh my gosh.
She was so nervous, she was literally shaking, because there she was to give a deposition, and Lance Armstrong had flown from Austin on his private jet to watch her testify about him, and she knew exactly what kind of message he was trying to send.
There was a long table in the conference room, and it was me and my lawyer and Lance. I was furious.
Why?
So I saw what Lance was doing, how he was on his BlackBerry, how he was on his computer.
Because it wasn't a lie. I'm not going to say somebody's lying when they are not lying.
She was the first witness who effectively said, I don't care what happens to me, I'm going to tell the truth.
First, tell me where you were.
Michelle's, it's a restaurant in Villefranche.
I had never been in a deposition before, so when I didn't remember something, a restaurant, I had leaned over and I asked Lance.
It is Villefranche, isn't it, Lance?
Objection. Well,
you can't do that. Hold it, you can't do that. So I was just answering questions, honestly.
I just would like you to recount what took place in the Indiana University hospital room.
The doctor asked him a couple of questions, and then came the question, have you ever taken any performance-enhancing drugs? And Lance said yes. The doctor said, what were they? And he said, EPO, growth hormone, cortisone, steroids, and testosterone.
Did any medical person ask you while you were at the Indiana University Hospital whether you had ever used any sort of performance-enhancing drugs or substances?
No.
Can you offer, or can you help explain to me why Miss Andrew would make that story up?
Well, she said in her deposition she hates me.
I don't know how the doctor phrased the question, but Lance's response was that he had taken EPO and testosterone and growth hormone and cortisone.
Why would Mr. Andrew say the same things, if you know?
Probably to support his wife, which
I don't know if you're married or not, but
I am.
sometimes is required.
So your testimony that Mr. Andrew was also lying when he said that he heard you say those things regarding your prior use?
100%. But I feel for him.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think he's trying to back up his old lady.
Frankie Andrew was under extremely difficult circumstances at that particular point in time, all of which was a result of Lance Armstrong.
Well, did Mr. Armstrong ever tell you during that time period that he definitely was not going to use EPO and no one else should use EPO?
No.
Did he indicate to you that he was going to use EPO or consider using EPO?
No.
He said openly and to the public that Betsy was crazy. They implied behind the scenes that Betsy wasn't believable and perhaps unstable. Everything you can possibly think of as a way to hurt someone, they basically employed.
And what is it you told Frankie after leaving the room?
His modus operandi, which was don't attack the message, attack the messenger. So if people don't know me, people are gonna say, well, wait a minute, who is this woman? Her husband stopped racing early. If he was so good, why'd he do that? If Lance is dirty, then why hasn't the governing body caught him? Why does USA Cycling back him? Why do his sponsors back him? Why does he keep getting more and more money from him? How come none of these doctors who allegedly heard what happened in the hospital room, how come they're remaining quiet? How come nobody has backed her up for that hospital room? Look at his legions of fans. He has a foundation fighting cancer. What is this woman doing besides raising her own kids? His problem was never with Frankie.
And after Mr. Armstrong told the doctor he was using certain performance-enhancing drugs, did your husband ever tell you that's wrong, he hasn't done those drugs? Not your husband, but Mr. Armstrong.
No.
How could it have taken place when I've never taken performance-enhancing drugs?
Okay.
How could that have happened?
That was my point. You're not. It's not just simply you don't recall. Just.
How many times do I have to say it?
I'm just trying to make sure your testimony is clear.
Well, if it can't be any clearer than I've never taken drugs, then incidents like that could never have happened.
Okay.
How clear is that?
These are things that are so devious, if untrue, but so powerful when you use with people that makes you a compelling liar. I'll give you an example. Bad liar, Richard Nixon. Sweaty, looked suspicious, said goofy things when people challenged him. I'm not a crook. Great liar, Lance Armstrong. I never doped. I passed every test. And anyone who challenges me, I'm currently suing and are proving they're lying. That's a good liar.
Greg, who I know has serious drinking and drug problems, was clearly intoxicated, yelling, screaming.
It started off as, you know, hey, Greg, I thought we were friends.
Friends? What do you mean friends?
He said, well, if you want to throw stones, I can throw stones.
He went after his reputation, his livelihood, and his way of life.
Well, let me see. Being called potentially the biggest fraud in the history of sport, that was a little bit upsetting.
He's set out to destroy me every step of the way. I lost a company that did $20 million in sales in the U.S.
Oh, he said the sport is full of crooks and thieves and liars.
I've been at trade shows where dealers, they said I would see them that I knew, and they wouldn't even look at me.
He didn't like that either.
How could this be? How could it be that my career collide with this guy and then he takes everything away from me?
We also wanted to believe in Lance. And it was hard to find out that it wasn't, I don't know why I'm crying, but it was really hard to find out that this was going on.
It's been awful stressful. If I'd known for a second, I wouldn't have done it.
They were very, very mean and very dismissive of Emma O'Reilly, as they were really almost of all of the women that testified against Mr. Armstrong.
Afraid that we were going to out her as a, and all these things she said, as a whore or whatever, I don't know. But primarily,
You don't talk about people like that. And also, too, by calling me those names, calling me basically an alcoholic prostitute, it's just attacking me personally, but it's not addressing the points that I brought up. You know, and that's probably what upset me the most over it all.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly state the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
We had been told that Stephanie McIlvaine would testify that, yes, she heard Mr. Armstrong admit to drug use. So we went out to depose her in California at her place of business, which was Oakley.
What kinds of things do you do?
I take care of, I take care of Lance Armstrong and cycling also.
She called us up and she was in tears. Lance called me, and Lance was pissed. And I thought, oh my God. He said, you're gonna lie, Stephanie. You're gonna lie to keep your job.
Stephanie needed that job. Her husband worked for Oakley. He needed a job. She's got a young son who's autistic. They were in an extremely difficult position.
Were you ever in a hospital room or other part of the hospital with Mr. Armstrong where he said anything about performance-enhancing drugs?
No.
Do you have any recollection of any doctor in your presence asking Mr. Armstrong if he used in the past any performance-enhancing drugs or substances?
No.
Betsy was going to be thrown under the bus, and I finally told her, I said, Betsy, I recorded her, and I have the tape.
Well, Stephanie?
Yeah?
This is Greg Lamont calling.
Greg who?
Greg Lamont.
Hi, Greg, how are you?
How you doing?
I'm doing well.
If I did get down to where it was a lawsuit, would you be willing to testify or?
If I was subpoenaed, I would.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to lie. You know, I was in that room. I heard it. The part that pisses me off about the whole thing, it's how many people he has given false hope to.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most disgusting thing ever for someone to do. You know, it's coming from somebody who has a child with a handicap, and you look for hope and you look for strength. And for him to be doing that to those poor people who look up to him and honestly think that he's doing this because he's just Superman.
I agree.
And that kills me.
This recording was done well before her deposition, so all we could conclude from that was someone got to her, because she clearly changed her testimony.
Stephanie told me many times that she heard the hospital room admission. Stephanie told me that her ultimate boss, Jim Gennard, CEO and founder of Oakley, knew about Lance Armstrong's doping. She had had conversations with Jim Gennard that discussed Lance's doping and stories that Jim had heard from Lance concerning Lance's doping.
I already told Jim Gennard what's going on, and I told him I won't lie.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow.
And he says, well, you know, there's certain ways to get around it. I said, I don't care, Jim. I said, if I lie, I said, I wouldn't be able to live with myself.
Yeah.
You know, because
Once I made that recording public to the Lance Armstrong side, saying, I think you've monkeyed with this witness, literally all hell broke loose.
I said, you lied, didn't you? I just had this bad feeling. You lied, didn't you, Stephanie? Pat was told if I make the company look bad, that we'll both lose our jobs. We can't afford to lose our jobs, Betsy. We don't have college degrees. Where are we gonna go? What are we gonna do? She made her bed. She made her decision.
that's foul. Wow.
Hi, Betsy. It's Stephanie, your friend from California. I shouldn't say friend. It's pathetic, Betsy. I thought you were a better person than that. And I'm so saddened that you're not. I've moved on. I don't have any contact with Lance. I have no contact with you. But you just keep going and going and going. I also hope that one day you have adversity in your life and you have some type of tragedy, because you're such a shallow bitch.
So, our relationship was over.
If you have a doping offense or you test positive, it goes without saying that you're fired from all of your contracts, not just the team, but there's numerous contracts that I have that would all go away.
Sponsorship agreements, for example.
All of them. And the faith of all the cancer survivors around the world. So everything I do off of the bike would go away too. And don't think for a second, I don't understand that.
Either everyone who I had talked to and all the evidence I had gathered and all the scientists and other people were liars, which I found frankly impossible, or Lance approached basically a clinical sociopath, someone able to do wrong without remorse or care as to who they hurt in the process. The former was unpalatable, the latter was scary, that we were litigating with someone who would do anything to prevail.
It's not about money for me. Everything. It's also about the faith that people have put in me over the years. So all of that would be erased. So I don't need it to say in a contract, you're fired if you test positive. That's not as important as losing the support of hundreds of millions of people.
That's an easy question.
The SCA case was settled on really what it said in the contract.
Lance has always followed the rules of the Tour de France, and he's won 7 times. Every time he wins, and he's a certified winner, he's followed the rules, and Tailwind has had an obligation to pay him.
After all, he was still officially the Tour de France winner. That was really the question, and if SCA went forward with that case, it would have been a big risk. So they ended up paying Armstrong $7 million to settle it.
We just paid. Lance slipped past the gates and said, "Time to fold your tent, boys."
Floyd Landis used to ride alongside Lance Armstrong on the U.S. Postal Service for 3 years. They split up in a little bit of disenchantment.
Well, Floyd Landis has launched an attack. He's trying to ride all of these men off his wheel on the Col de Saisy. Surely with 8 minutes left. He is one of the great riders of this race once again.
Well, this is one of the most incredible performances I've seen. It's fine letting a guy like Richard.
Is it nice to come out of the shadows of Armstrong in such a golden style?
Yeah, again, I've said many times I was one of the lucky ones to be part of his 7 wins.
Yet another doping scandal hits the very top of the Tour de France.
Floyd, back here. Yes, the winner of this year's prestigious cycling race, Floyd Landis, has tested positive for testosterone. It's the first time in the history of the Tour de France that a winner has...
When I look back now, nobody on that team was ever positive. No positives. The moment they left, every rider that was a competitor that Armstrong didn't like, boom, they're positive.
It's been an amazing year. I stood up here last year and everybody at their table had little pieces of yellow silicone sitting there, and somewhere along the way 50 million of them were sold.
What showed up in your sample?
Nothing.
Were you doping in the Tour de France?
No.
I told Frankie, I can't believe nobody's ever asked you whether or not you've ever done anything or tried anything. But if somebody does, I'm not going to be one of the wives who stand by you as you lie. I'm not going to do it.
I raced for 12 years as a professional. I used EPO at a certain moment.
There are many people out there that worry whether they had cancer in their families or not, that cancer is going to get them. It's the scariest disease there is, and we think we're making a difference on it.
I agree.
One of my biggest accomplishments was raising my son, Lance. I am so proud to be the mom of Lance Armstrong.
We will lose more than 560,000 Americans to cancer this year.
Landis was stripped of his title and banned from the sport for 2 years.
It's time for a government that wages a war against cancer as aggressive as the war cancer wages against us.
We will beat this dreaded disease, and we will win.
The longer it went on, the more impressed I am that Lance could maintain a story like that was nearly 100% fabricated.
and still live such an obnoxious life and not even try to hide it. I mean, I'm a guy that he's never really even met.
Mr. President, you've been a longtime friend of mine. Thank you. Thank you for being a friend and for allowing us to be here to talk about this critical issue. As some of you may or may not know, I've decided to race my bicycle again.
Lance came back because he couldn't stay away.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome 7-time Tour de France champion Lance Armstrong.
Why couldn't he stay away? Because it's like the oldest theme in Hollywood that you've ever come across. The jewel thief, the bank robber, the assassin. They do their jobs brilliantly. They win every time. They kill all the people they should kill. They get all the jewels they should get. They get all the money from the bank they should get. Somebody comes and says, one more job. Just one more little turn on the carousel, and they can't resist. Because that was them living like they'd never lived before, or they will never live again.
I cannot guarantee a victory this time. I'm not... What?
Please stop your whining.
I'd made several requests to interview Lance, especially when he announced that he was going to be different this time with the media, that he was going to be open and transparent, and there wasn't going to be any of the stuff that had gone on before where he'd been very, very difficult.
Can we start? Hello?
And I baited him.
Lance, you've spoken recently about the return of Evan Basso and Floyd Landis after their suspensions. What is it about these dopers that you seem to admire so much?
Excuse me? What is your name again?
My name is Paul Kimmage. I work for the Sunday Times. I asked for an interview, but I didn't get one.
Right, and just as a little preface, I might just clear up one thing. And the reason you didn't get it, Paul, I wanted to make sure that was you because I don't know what you look like. When I decided to come back for what I think is a very noble reason, you said, folks, the cancer has been in remission for 4 years, but our cancer has now returned, meaning me. I am here to fight this disease. I am here so that I don't have to deal with it, you don't have to deal with it, none of us have to deal with it, my children don't have to deal with it. But yet you said that I am the cancer. So I think it goes without saying, no, we're not going to sit down and do an interview. And I don't think anybody in this room would sit down for that interview. You are not worth the chair that you're sitting on with a statement like that, with a disease that touches everybody around the world.
You don't have a patent on cancer, by the way. Now, I've lost people with cancer. I'm interested in the cancer of doping in cycling. That has been my life's work. I raced as a professional. I exposed it. And then you come along and it disappears. The problem disappears.
Getting back to the Tour of California.
Armstrong shaded his 7 victories in the Tour de France. He's got happy memories of the Pyrenees, and they're all coming back now.
When Floyd has lost all his money, fighting his ban, and he calls up Johan Bernil and says, look, will you get me on your team? I need a place. And Lance and Bernil, both kindred spirits in terms of having no emotional intelligence, decide they don't want to have anything to do with Floyd. He's just a loser. He got caught. They don't realise that they're actually handling a ticking bomb here. Floyd has offered them the chance to defuse the bomb, to just take out that little pin or whatever, give him a little small job in the team, everything is okay. They tell him to get lost, and the bomb blows up in their faces.
And now it's all down to him.
He saw Armstrong, who he knew from the first day he'd entered the sport was doped, who had shown Floyd how to dope. And all he sees is this fucking shit everywhere. Hope rides again. The great God, the Jesus of cycling, is coming back. And all of the spectators are getting down on bended knee. And he's thinking, this is not right. This sticks in my throat. I'm gonna sort this out.
We catch up now with Lance Armstrong.
At least now I've confirmed that there's nothing else to lose. Nothing. There's nothing in it for me in cycling. There's no team for me. No matter what I do, it's going to be worse and worse until I leave. Eventually, the levee breaks.
Tonight, Landis and others once close to Lance go on camera for the first time for our special report, Did Lance Cheat?
Look, at some point people have to tell their kids that Santa Claus isn't real. I hate to be the guy to do it, but it's just not real.
You're saying Lance Armstrong is a liar?
Yes, I suppose if that's the question, yes.
You have somebody that's been under oath several times with a completely different version. You have somebody that's written a book with a completely different version. You have somebody that took people's money for their defense, some would say $1 million, with a completely different version. He said he has nothing. He's got no proof. It's his word versus ours. We like our word. We like where we stand. We like our credibility.
As Lance Armstrong prepares for his final weekend at the Tour de France, a federal investigation into alleged doping by him and his former team threatens to tarnish his golden image. The investigation was sparked by allegations by former friend and teammate Floyd Landis.
At the end of July, I got a phone call from Jeff Nowitzki. And one of the first questions I asked him was, what's taking you so long to call me?
It was scary. Because that whole, there's Jeff Nowitzki, federal agent, it's like, put the holy terror of God in you.
Nowitzki was able to bring these guys into a room. He would open up his coat and, oh, sorry, I didn't mean you to see my gun. That's what they do. And then he takes his sheriff's badge out, drops it on the table, in case you forget that he's a cop. And then he says to you, you know, if you lie to us, it'll be perjury. And we will know you're lying to us because of all we know about this case. And then we will go after you, and you'll end up doing prison time.
Subpoena means you come in. There's no question. You go in and you tell the truth in front of the grand jury. No lawyer by your side.
I probably told him more stuff, more detail than what I had revealed to anybody else before.
You know, the information kind of started trickling out of me. And then after 15 minutes or so, it just poured out of me. I don't think they were expecting any kind of testimony like they got. Lance Armstrong didn't appreciate that. A few months later, I was out at dinner with some friends, and he must have had eyes on me because he had people contact him and let him know where I was, and he approached me and tried to intimidate me. Said he was going to make my life a living hell, both in the courtroom and out of the courtroom.
Lance was really pissed that Greg questioned why he was working with Ferrari.
He helped to call the shots. Yes, he doped himself.
If he didn't win the Tour, someone else that was doped would have won the Tour.
I really felt happy at that moment because I thought, that's it. There is no way back now, because Floyd had given chapter and verse. And I thought the tide was now irreversible.
Lance Armstrong handed me some testosterone patches. It's just a little patch that you put on your skin. It's not like it's a...
They can't say that. Nobody is that conniving. Nobody is that good to try and get away with something for 17, 18, 19 years. No way. No.
If you think he was facing jail, he had to have been scared to death. He called every single famous political favor he could possibly pull in.
I had just woken up and I'd switched on my phone. My brother had direct messaged me on Twitter and saying, WTF, the Fed's case has been dropped.
When you want to give news that you don't want anybody to notice, you put it out at a time when everybody is distracted by somebody else. This news was dropped late on a Friday afternoon on Super Bowl weekend when America goes into party mode. And Lance Armstrong, for one weekend, ceases to be relevant. And if ever the timing of something suggested political corruption or impropriety, it just stank.
Obama was running for re-election, and it wouldn't have looked good to go after the American hero, who still had a lot of supporters.
It goes to show you the power that Armstrong has. He got a federal investigation shut down, despite having all that information out there and all that evidence out there.
I was not proud to be an American at the time. I was so disappointed in the whole system, that, this corruption can happen and favors can be granted.
Travis Taggart picks up the baton. He says, I'm going to ask all these cyclists to come and be interviewed by me.
This was not just Lance Armstrong getting away with doping for a few years. This was something by far bigger and greater than just that. They took it to an entirely different level, and no other team, right, won 7 Tour de France's, and all the glory and all the profits and all the sponsorships that went along with that. He was the boss. The evidence is clear. He was one of the ringleaders of this conspiracy that pulled off this grand heist using tens of millions of taxpayer dollars that defrauded millions of sports fans and his fellow competitors.
Lance immediately went on the attack, immediately sued them in his home court, immediately started saying USADA is a terrible, bad, kangaroo court organization. I thought, here we go again. He's gonna bloody them up. He's gonna walk away from this.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Team Radio Shack bus. We're on our way to
Almost at every turn, the lobbyists for Armstrong and his criminal defense attorneys and others wanted to bankrupt us and take us down.
The boss, Mr. Brunel. Impressionante.
Whether it was on claiming to the world media we had no authority, or we were on witch hunts, or the jurisdiction didn't rest with us. There were numerous efforts by them to ensure this information never got out.
Your investigation showed that there were personal threats made against riders who had decided to come clean. I wonder if there were any threats against you.
There were, Scott.
These threats came from where?
Emails, letters.
Anonymous?
Yeah.
Can you remember any of the lines from the emails or the letters?
The worst was probably putting a bullet in my head.
Did you take that seriously?
Absolutely. Turned it over to the FBI to investigate it, which they're doing.
A new report from the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency reveals overwhelming...
Just months after federal prosecutors dropped their investigation, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency says they now have proof that the 7-time winner of the Tour de France...
From our end, it was never personal. In fact, we gave him the same opportunity to come in and be part of this solution.
1,000 pages of evidence provided by the agency include first-hand accounts, scientific documents...
Lance believed that he was bulletproof, that he was invincible, that they could bring down the Floyds, the Tylers, they could bring down anybody. But you can't bring down me because I'm too big to be brought down.
I thought in light of recent events, I ought to reintroduce myself. My name is Lance Armstrong. I am a cancer survivor. I've been asked to come up here and talk about my story of survivorship. I'm a father of 5, and yes, I won the Tour de France 7 times.
UCI will ban Lance Armstrong from cycling, and UCI will strip him of his 7 Tour de France titles. Lance Armstrong has no place in cycling.
I don't have anything to worry about. Nobody needs to cry for me. I'm gonna be great.
Is there any something to take your mind off the news this week? I'm more at ease now than I have been in 10 years.
What surprised me was how quickly it fell apart.
This was a day we could not have imagined.
Nike has fired Lance Armstrong over allegations he was doping during races.
And it first hit me when Nike announced they were fleeing.
Over the last 10 years, he's made more than an estimated $100 million.
What am I on? I'm on my bike, busting my ass 6 hours a day. What are you on?
And then almost in rapid succession, everyone left him.
Anheuser-Busch, FRS sports drinks, Trek bicycles, and Giro helmets all dropped today like dominoes.
And suddenly, in a matter of days, it collapsed.
Oh, my golly. The category tonight, Paul, take a guess what you think the category might be tonight.
Well, because there's something about Lance Armstrong.
Nice going. Nice going. Honest to God, who cares about cycling? No one.
We were pulling into the driveway, and right when we pulled into the driveway, Betsy's phone rings. And Betsy turned to me and goes, "It's Lance."
And our daughter in the back said, "Is it really him? Is it really him?"
He apologized. Apologized for everything he'd done. And I said, it must be, it's got to be a tough phone call for you to make. I said, I appreciate it. And I said, I'm sure you're going through hell for the last, month and a half. I said, but know that I've been going through hell for 10 years with this shit.
The Lance in that phone call was a Lance I've never, ever. It was the Lance I didn't know. He really genuinely seemed contrite. And he apologized. He said he had done a lot of bad things to a lot of good people. I said, Lance, you better admit that hospital room happened.
Now, the worldwide exclusive, Oprah and Lance Armstrong.
So let's start with the questions that people around the world have been waiting for you to answer. And for now, I'd just like a yes or no. Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
Yes or no. Was one of those banned substances EPO?
Yes.
I was physically sick.
Did you ever blood dope or use blood transfusions to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
It was sort of like an old Mike Tyson fight that by the time you sat down in your ringside seat, he'd already knocked the guy out and it was over.
Did you ever use any other banned substances like testosterone, cortisone, or human growth hormone?
Yes.
I was like, holy shit. Wow. Wow. Yeah, am I jealous and bitter and vindictive now?
In all 7 of your Tour de France victories, did you ever take banned substances or blood dope?
Yes.
Those 5 yeses in one fell swoop just wiped out a generation of cyclists. Watching the show, for me, was like, I never thought those words would come out of Lance Armstrong's mouth. I mean, it was unbelievable.
Was Betsy telling the truth about the Indiana hospital? Overhearing you in 1996?
I'm not going to take that on. And I'm laying down on that one.
Was Betsy lying?
And he dropped the ball. He dropped the ball.
She asked me, and I asked her not to talk about
what you said?
The details of the call. It was a confidential, personal conversation. It was 40 minutes long.
So again, it was classic Lance, his way out. Throughout that whole interview, he just used me.
He called to apologize so that when he went on Oprah, he could say, oh yeah, I've reached out to people to apologize, and I'm a changed man, I'm trying to be better. It played into his hands, it played into his game.
My stepfather called me and said, your mom's having a really hard time. Then I saw my mom. And I thought, oh, this woman's a wreck.
What has been the financial cost? Have you lost everything?
I don't like thinking about it. But that was I don't know. That was a $75 million day. Gone.
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 Do you think he will ever come clean?
No, I don't think fully. Partly because it'll burn too many people.
Say hi to the camera.
He's protected Bernil, he's protected Ferrari, he's protected Tom Weissel, he's protected Bill Stapleton, and he's protected, I believe, the medical people at that hospital.
It's really not about him, but about the people behind him. They put this team together that had knowledge of the doping, that went out and then sold sponsorships to the tune of about 30+ million federal dollars from citizens of the United States of America. It's alleged fraud.
I don't know Lance Armstrong now. The man I knew in 1993, I had a blast with. A great friend, and it's hard for me to talk about because of how much hell he put me through, and my wife through.
He's like the guy who robs a bank and then says, oops, forgot to frisk the tellers for any money they might have in their pockets. So he essentially wanted it all. Most of the cheats pretty much stop at the water's edge. Lance didn't.
I had it. And then it just, things got too big. Things got too crazy.
What Lance never had was the truth, which is more powerful than the corrupt athlete.
Is the American Lance Armstrong in the millennium as one of the finest sporting.
It's an epic story.